So I've played through this new Final Fantasy spin-off game and wanted to share my thoughts about it. First off, the game is a lot of fun. One of my favorite modern Final Fantasy games, not that that counts for much looking at the competition. It's also very flawed, incredibly flawed. I really enjoyed my time with it, but I'm not sure yet if I'd call it an overall good game. Certainly not a great one. The game is a reimagining of Final Fantasy I with the combat and dungeon crawling of a Souls-like. Well, I say it's a reimagining, but it might also be a completely new story that just pretends to be FF1. There is some mysterious plot happening in the background that implies not everything is as it seems, and some details are not the same as in the original story. Instead of going after the former knight Garland, who kidnapped Princess Sarah, the Warriors of Light in this game are being sent after Chaos, who only appeared at the end of FF1. And the princess herself is safe and sound inside Cornelia Castle. Furthermore, she asks the heroes to look for an adventurer called Garland, who set out to defeat Chaos about 10 years ago, but nobody remembers him. We're not even playing as the 4 Warriors of Light, because there are only 3 heroes, at least for now. And after finishing the first dungeon, we come to know that the whole Chaos business is just a myth, told to give the people hope. So there are quite some big differences to the original story. But we will still kinda follow the main story beats of the original game. We have to travel to each crystal location and defeat the fiend guarding it. We have to fight the pirates in the town of Pravoka, and we still get to meet the king of the Dark Elves, Astos. But everything resolves a bit differently. But no matter what the actual story tries to do, when it comes to the enemies you'll encounter and places you'll visit, the game is indeed, at least in kind, a reimagining of Final Fantasy I. And before I dive deeper into the story and spoil everything, let's talk about gameplay for a bit. The game is a bit of an hybrid between Souls-like and Musou games. Sounds weird, and it is, but let me explain. Dungeons are huge and sprawling with interconnected pathways and unlockable shortcuts. Dangerous enemies are lying in wait around every corner, ready to ambush us and able to kill us in just a few hits. And whenever we die, we get sent back to the last checkpoint thingy we've come across. We get to keep all the items we collected, all the doors and shortcuts stay open, but all the enemies are back to life. We'll lose some of our resources on death, in this case mana, but are able to pick it back up, sometimes, if we manage to get back to where we died. During combat we can dodge and block to avoid taking damage, consume a limited resource to heal ourselves that replenishes after a revive, and perform light R1 attacks over and over to chip away at enemies' health bars, and manage a kind of endurance meter during combat to avoid getting staggered and thus being open for a critical attack. As for what the game borrowed from Musou games, the heavy attack got replaced by special attacks that function, well, as they do in Musou games. Depending on how far we are into a standard attack chain, activating a special attack will result in a different outcome. So a special attack after only one hit might be just a stronger attack with some good knockback, while a special attack after the third hit might be a strong AoE attack. And this is a pretty strange combination, to be honest. Musou games have us mostly dealing with big groups of fodder enemies that attack sparingly and don't inflict a lot of damage and are easily interrupted or staggered. So pulling off combo attacks left and right is really easy to do, and to be honest, the games are more about spectacle than tight and strategic combat. Souls games, on the other hand, tend to be more methodic, wanting us to make every attack count, keep our guard up and never resort to button mashing. Add to that in this game special attacks cost mana, and that we don't really have that much of it at any given moment, then these two ideologies seem to clash pretty hard. And well, they do, at times, but not at others. Depending on the weapon, fighting some of the slower or weaker regular enemies has enough opportunities to use combos and special attacks pretty frequently, so much so that it can even become kind of mindless. Bosses and mini-bosses, on the other hand, don't lend themselves to this approach. They don't flinch when getting hit, their attacks can't be interrupted, and they attack pretty frequently with hard-hitting moves. Even if we manage to get a combo going to build up to a strong or useful special attack, we most assuredly get hit at one point during this, losing a quarter of our health bar, which isn't a good trade-off for a slightly more powerful attack. So the more iconic fights, the fights you have to engage the most with the combat system, incentivize you to not use half of the mechanics. And this isn't by far the only misguided design decision, but this one sticks out the most, because the game gives you just so damn many options to customize your fighting style, but during the hardest and longest fights, we use just a fraction of them. And that really makes me think that the only reason for why this game even tries to copy the popular Souls-like design is, well, just because it is popular right now. And don't get me wrong, I appreciate the idea and I love the moments where everything just comes together, when everything works as intended. It's just that it doesn't a lot of the time. The game works, most of the encounters are fine, you always have the tools to beat a boss, and the game isn't really grindy in any way. But it could be so much better. It could be actually great instead of just fine. The mechanics in isolation are all pretty damn good, but they just don't come together that well. And that's kinda weird considering this was made by the devs behind Nioh, which has enough of its own flaws, but was still a pretty competent Dark Souls clone that focused on more complex fighting styles. And a lot of their talent still shines through. It's just that many systems haven't been implemented all that well. Fittingly for a Final Fantasy I reimagining, this game features a job system, containing all the classic and iconic character classes, as well as some new ones. Each job has access to certain weapons and special abilities, and while earlier jobs often only work with a single weapon type, later jobs offer us a selection of different reusable weapons, with fighter jobs giving access to nearly every weapon group, and caster jobs focusing more on special abilities, to an extent. Every job has its own special move that can be just another attack or a buff or the ability to cast certain spells. This ability is always available as long as the job is selected. Every job has also a skill tree used to unlock upgrades to attack power or defense and sometimes other stats, to upgrade the job's special ability and to learn more special attacks. To unlock anything, we have to gain experience from fighting enemies or use crystal shards that act as an instant experience boost. It's important to note that there aren't really character levels in this game. The main character Jack never actually gets stronger, he just gets more proficient with all the different jobs. Through this, he does receive stat bonuses from the selected job as long as it is selected, but it's not that huge of an increase. The unlockable abilities, on the other hand, do make a huge difference. Whenever we unlock a combo finisher, we get to keep it for its associated weapon type, even when we change jobs. And over the course of the game, we'll get to learn a lot of different combo finishers for each weapon, and we can mix and match the combo attacks how we see fit, similar to games like God Hand or Remember Me. There are some rules to this we have to abide by, but it still offers a lot of customization. Do we rather want elemental attacks or attacks that inflict negative status effects on an enemy, or just attacks that pack more of a punch? The choice is ours. Then there are command abilities, of which we can equip up to 3 at any given moment. These abilities are selected from a hotbar and are just more abilities to use, but without being restricted to certain jobs or equipment. The 4th command ability is reserved for Jack's Lightbringer ability, where he has infinite stamina for a short amount of time and can inflict permanent damage to the enemy's Break Gauge. Which leads me into talking about the break system, I guess. So this game doesn't have the traditional Souls-like stamina system, so you can attack and run and roll around as much as you like during combat. In its place, there is the Break Gauge, that both the player character as well as party members and enemies have. Getting hit takes away a bit from the Break Gauge, and if it's reduced to 0, the combatant gets staggered. For Jack and his allies, this means being unable to move or act until they recovered or get hit by an attack. But enemies stay down much longer and don't recover after getting hit. In addition to being open for Jack's special finisher, where he instantly and brutally kills an enemy and turns them into red crystals that restore a bit of magic. Depending on the fighting style or chosen weapon, attacks deal more damage to either the enemy's HP or their break gauge. And while a break finisher against weaker enemies is mostly used to restore mana, stronger enemies that can heal themselves are often easier to defeat by reducing their break gauge to 0, since exploiting a weakness always takes away a big chunk of it and even permanently decreases it. And using Lightbringer is just another tactic to more quickly reduce the boss's break gauge. Early on in the game I was under the impression that Lightbringer is the way to fight against bosses, but I quickly learned that there often are better ways to deal with certain enemies. Magic, for example, which can really break the game. For real, some spells are just ludicrously overpowered. Now, having an attack connect with the player character always results in the break gauge decreasing, no matter whether we manage to block or not. So battles have a bit of a different rhythm to other Souls-like games. In Dark Souls, getting hit doesn't decrease our stamina. We'd still try to avoid it because dying is kinda bad. But the stamina management only ever crossed over with the player's hit points when we fucked up. If we rolled around too much or blocked too many attacks or attacked over and over again. When an enemy broke through our block, we were open for an attack or even a critical strike, but we weren't prohibited from trying to defend ourselves after getting damaged by an enemy. In Stranger of Paradise, a successful hit decreases our HP as well as our break gauge, so it's possible to get hit by a strong attack that nearly kills us and then being unable to dodge or block or heal ourselves because our break gauge is empty. And this is something to keep in mind, especially since there are a lot of attacks that hit multiple times and don't always let us dodge out of the way. It's a different system that requires a different approach, though I'm inclined to deem it as inferior to the traditional system. That doesn't mean it isn't an engaging system though. Dodging isn't always a viable option because the quickstep is uselessly short and the dodge roll is slow and has some delay because it is executed by double tapping the quickstep button. But since sprinting doesn't require any stamina, it's often possible to avoid taking damage by just running away from an attack. And then there are the two ways to block incoming damage, a normal block and the soul shield. Most of the time both options negate all incoming damage, but magic attacks can penetrate the normal block. So we should always use the soul shield, right? It's of course a bit more complicated. The regular block doesn't use up anything as long as it doesn't actually stop an attack, and the amount the break gauge decreases is less than with the soul shield. In addition, blocking at the last possible moment for a perfect block speeds up break gauge recovery for a short period of time. The soul shield, on the other hand, drains away the break gauge the moment it is activated, so it has to be timed correctly to be of any use. But blocking with it restores a bit of mana and can even absorb some enemy attacks and turn them into consumable abilities that we can throw back at the enemy whenever we want, though only one ability can be stored at any time. During boss fights, using the soul shield is the main method to recover mana, because there often is no fodder to destroy with a break finisher and there are no items to replenish mana, and while attacking also replenishes mana, as I've already described, it's not really possible to continuously attack a boss most of the time. There are some abilities that can recover mana over time, but even those need one mana bar to be activated. And mana management is another important and misguided mechanic in this game. When entering a dungeon, we start off with 2 bars of mana. Most abilities use up 1 bar, though some, like the cure spell, use up 2. And attacking only slowly recovers up to your max amount of available bars. By killing enemies with the break finisher or by successfully using the soul shield, the maximum amount of mana slowly increases up to a maximum of 6 bars. And dying decreases your maximum amount of mana. but never lower than the base amount of 2, which sounds interesting enough and works well enough during dungeon exploration, but it does kinda encourage grinding out weak enemies to build up your mana bar before tackling stronger foes, which is especially egregious before a boss fight. I mean, if we couldn't defeat a boss at the height of our strength, why would we try again in a weakened state? Just fight a bunch of enemies outside the boss room until we are on full mana once again. It helps that there's always a checkpoint right in front of a boss arena. But I'm making it sound worse than it actually is. I believe I only once grinded some mana before another attempt at a boss, and even then I didn't really need to do that. That's the thing with the mana system in this game. I only noticed it when it inconvenienced me, but I never had to engage too much with it. It prolonged some boss fights a bit because I started with just blocking a bunch of attacks to build up enough mana to use my special abilities or the Lightbringer. And to be honest, it took me a long time to notice that I could replenish all my lost mana by touching my soul remains or whatever they're called in this game. I soon forgot about it again because it's not even always possible to collect your lost mana. Sometimes the remains just don't appear and I don't know why. Not that I care. As I've said, this system doesn't really add anything to the game. They should have just stuck with the traditional system of losing experience points, or just had the player lose nothing on death. Or include a ranking system that determines the rewards after the mission, or something like that. Losing mana isn't really a punishment outside of boss battles, and even then it's not that much of a problem. But not having the player lose experience, even having them level up immediately, can at times actually reward the player with higher job affinity or new abilities for fucking up during a boss fight, as long as they killed something in it. Which isn't necessarily bad, but it adds to my feeling that a lot of the design decisions were pretty misguided, which is kind of a problem with JRPGs for a long time now. Simple concepts get implemented overly complicated, useless mechanics get thrown in to blow up the gameplay. Final Fantasy has been guilty of this for a long time now, starting with the Sphere board in FF10 and the License board in FF12, whatever they did in 13, and of course the weird hybrid of action and ATB combat in the remake of 7. But comparing my last example to this game, I'd have to say, when just looking at the combat, I prefer Stranger of Paradise to the FF7 remake, and I'd be happy to have more games in that style than in the remakes. Mostly because I want the battles, which are a lot of fun, to be improved a bit more. I already described how the combat works, but all our offensive and defensive options mean nothing without good enemies. And the enemies in this game are mostly fine. They all, at least those with limbs, have different melee attacks that they telegraph well enough. The window for blocking those attacks is pretty generous, so even if an attack animation isn't perfectly readable, it's still not a problem to block it. But since blocking is easier than dodging and even rewards you with mana or break recovery, enemies have a way to force you to dodge. They can perform unblockable attacks, where we either have to dodge or get the enemy to stagger before the actual attack happens. These attacks are accompanied by red text over the enemy's head, and god, I hate this solution. I really don't like it when the game expects me to read what the enemy is doing instead of watching their movements in an action game. This was one of the things that annoyed me the most during FF7 Remake's battles. Enemies didn't really telegraph their special attacks, instead I had to read the text above an enemy's head, and then I just had to know or remember how long it took for the attack to connect. The same happens in Stranger of Paradise, but at least here there is a little bit of a purpose to it. Since our soul shield can absorb some special attacks for us to use, the game has to tell us when this is actually possible. So whenever an enemy casts an absorbable spell, it's written in blue text above their head, and when it's unblockable, it's in red text. And spells or special attacks we can't absorb but still block are written in orange text. And while this works well enough most of the time, sometimes the enemy is too big or the camera is in a weird spot and we are not able to see the enemy's head, so we don't get to see what kind of attack the enemy is charging up. And sometimes just being near an enemy that activates an unblockable attack is enough to get afflicted by it. So if we can't even see that it's happening and all of a sudden we're in a kind of cutscene where the enemy grabs us and wails on us, well, it's fucking annoying. This all could have been done with animations. Give enemies a huge wind-up for unblockable attacks, have the spell effects appear for absorbable attacks, and well, just have a bit of consistency. Why can I absorb one fire spell of an enemy but not the other? Maybe have all projectiles being absorbable, but not AoE effects or something like that. I'm sure the talented developers over at Team Ninjas could have come up with some ideas. Let's move on to loadout and equipment. The game kinda went the route of a looter shooter. Every enemy drops one or more pieces of equipment, every treasure chest holds multiple weapons or armor pieces, and you get even more equipment after every mission. So you have to pull up the inventory screen every few minutes and check if the new equipment is stronger or has better bonuses than your old stuff. And there are so many factors to equipment. Attack or defense depending on whether it's a weapon or armor piece. 3 bonus stats like break, gauge, recovery, magic damage or break damage, elemental effects or debuffs, increased duration for Jack's Lightbringer ability and more. Then there's job affinity. We can increase this by leveling up a job, but most of our job affinity comes from equipment bonuses. And job affinity offers a few more stat bonuses at certain intervals, so it's just another thing to keep in mind when choosing our loadout, in theory. After a while I only used the optimize function from the equipment screen because I couldn't be asked to check everything every few minutes. I mean, I didn't had to, but equipment bonuses have the most substantial influence on attack power and defense. And the game has maximum equipment levels and fixed mission levels for each mission. So we can't over-level, for lack of a better word, but often start at a disadvantage, where our equipment is about 10 levels below the mission level. And you really feel it when your equipment isn't on par with the enemies. And this really annoys me. Not the fact that equipment is the main method of getting stronger. That's actually pretty neat and gives the devs a lot of control over the game's difficulty. But that we get so many pieces of equipment that navigating the inventory screen becomes tedious as hell. And all the equipment pieces look so good, but I can never stick to a style because, like I said, every few minutes I get something noticeably better. And sticking to this game's tradition of every mechanic being misguided, this system fucks over another system, namely the smithy, where we can dismantle old equipment for resources we need to upgrade the equipment we actually want to use. Just, why would we upgrade anything when we know that all our weapons and armors are 10 levels below the next mission and we will replace everything within the next 15 minutes? I thought that maybe after finishing the game this would make a bit more sense for tackling the missions on a higher difficulty. But no, the Chaos difficulty mode unlocked after beating the game increases the level of equipment drops. So yeah, just dismantle everything you're not wearing between each mission and ignore the rest of the system. Fewer but more substantial item drops would have been more suited. As it is now, it doesn't really hurt the game, since we can just automate everything, but it was just a waste of time and effort for the devs. Every mission is a dungeon topped off with a boss fight. Sometimes there is just a small cutscene before and after, sometimes there's even a short interactive story sequence where Jack can talk to different people to get a bit of flavor dialogue. Other than that, there's not much of JRPG in this game. We don't get to visit towns or other peaceful locations. We don't explore an overworld or hub area. There's no NPCs to talk to outside of the aforementioned sequences. Well, we can talk to a handful of NPCs in Cornelia Castle Town, after selecting them from a list on the menu screen. Missions are also just selected from the map screen. There's no traveling in between, no optional areas. There's not much adventuring to do in this game. Even Demon's Souls did more to contextualize the level select screen. But okay, the missions are a bit disconnected, but the levels themselves are pretty well designed. They're not as open-ended as in any FromSoft Souls games or most of the Souls-likes I have played. There are sometimes multiple paths and most levels have 1 or 2 shortcuts to loop back to an earlier checkpoint, but most levels are pretty linear, with a few hidden rooms to find and some extra treasures or pieces of lore information. But pretty much every level is appropriately designed. Forests or cave areas consist of more natural looking corridors, while castles try to have comprehensible architecture. The game does copy and paste some rooms or areas at times, and the level of detail never gets too high, but mostly the levels are very well crafted. They all look vastly different from each other, and pretty early on I noticed that the flavor text on the loading screen mentions different dimensions for each locale. That corresponds not only with art designs from the different games in the Final Fantasy series, but also with certain pieces of music. So while every mission is a reimagined location from the original Final Fantasy I, their design is borrowed from a different game of the franchise each time. It became pretty apparent in a river location from Dimension 13 when this music began to play. A really neat idea, and it's nice to traverse this new interpretation of old art designs and listen to remixed or at least inspired versions of older songs from the Final Fantasy franchise. Enemies placed in these levels are mostly appropriate for the area, with some reoccurring foes like tomberries for example. But except for a few occasions or for certain enemies like skeletons who rise from the ground when we get close, or bats that drop down from the ceiling, monsters are often just standing or walking around a room or hallway. There's no real sense that they belong in this place. They don't inhabit the castles, and they don't behave natural in forests or caves. They seem to just wait for the player to get near them. It makes sense that soldiers guard the flying fortress, but why are flans just crawling around in here? It comes across as a bit careless, or maybe even lazy. But this is not even the worst of it. The game, at times, loves to spam enemies at us that in turn love to spam their spells and unblockable attacks at us. And I often got stuck on some rock or outcrop or other object in the environment while trying to dodge an attack or switching targets. It felt like the environments were not really built for the enemy encounters, but more to look nice, and then the enemies were just dropped into them. Maybe this has something to do with the fact that levels are reused for side missions, where we have to take a different path through a level and fight different enemies. So maybe the levels were designed for versatility first and not for tightly crafted enemy encounters. But speaking of side missions, while they are technically optional, more often than not the next story missions level is too high for our equipment at that point, but the next available side mission is right in between our current level and the next missions. So it's always the best option to play a side mission as soon as it becomes available. And this is a bit weird. I would have preferred to have side missions appear later, so I don't have to replay the same level I finished a minute ago. And maybe have the main story progress at a steady and natural pace without spikes in mission levels. The side missions should have been the more difficult content, especially since the harder difficulty mode doesn't seem to do anything in this game. I haven't seen different enemy behavior, I guess they just have more HP and maybe more attack power, but even that didn't amount to much. I didn't really notice any difference. Well, I turned the difficulty back down to normal during the Tiamat boss fight, because I only wanted to test it and because the boss wrecked my shit, but well, it continued to do so even on normal. I've come to know since then that this boss seems to be a roadblock for many players. But the important thing is that, again, I didn't notice anything different between the two difficulty modes. There's also a story difficulty mode that decreases enemy stats, I guess, but more importantly, lets us block unblockable attacks. Not that I care much for it, but I guess it's a good addition for Final Fantasy fans who are not in for the hardcore experience. The Chaos difficulty mode we unlock after finishing the game behaves a bit differently. I don't know if enemies are actually more difficult, the same with hard mode, but what it does is it raises the mission level to an amount higher than the last mission on normal, and then increases with every mission. So it's kinda like New Game Plus from the Souls series. We can even spend anima crystals we receive from completing missions on Chaos difficulty to further raise a mission level, to get even higher level equipment. We can also unlock job mastery from completing missions on Chaos difficulty. Normally a job maxes out at level 30, which is manageable. I like it more than having a million levels and menial unlockable stat boosts that make leveling up feel more like ticking off items of a checklist. Every skill tree has about 15 upgrades to unlock, half of them combo attacks or command abilities, the other half boosts to job affinity or certain stats or the effect of a certain point in a combo chain. And all the basic jobs have the option to unlock 1 or 2 or even 3 advanced jobs at the bottom of the skill tree. But after unlocking job mastery, we can level up to level 100, and I'm glad this is a post-game feature. There are a lot of different jobs in this game and it's fun to unlock all the different abilities, mostly because it isn't a slog to complete any job tree. And even the jobs that are not as fun to play with can be maxed out with the help of a few anima shards, of which we'll collect a fuck ton throughout the game. And if we equipped any armor with job affinity for a job we haven't selected for our loadout, it gets experience just from that. So the game really does its best to help the player maxing out all the jobs and find the playstyle they're most comfortable with. And job mastery gives players the option to customize their experience even more by unlocking mastery points with every level beyond 30 and use them to further upgrade Jack's stats. I applaud the freedom we get with this system, and while I'm not interested in grinding every job to level 100, I appreciate the option to increase the effectiveness of my favorite jobs while I'm playing through the double or triple enhanced missions in Chaos mode. And I guess it offers a lot of options for online play as well. I haven't played too much of it yet, and I'm not really interested in playing with strangers, even in this game, but I guess it could be fun to go through the whole game again on ludicrous difficulty with a group of friends that all play highly specialized characters. But enough about gameplay and mechanics, let's talk about story. And yeah, there will be spoilers. The story of Stranger of Paradise is pretty intriguing and mysterious. Too bad you can't really enjoy it because it's horrendously told. There's a lot of interesting lore in here, some neat twists and good foreshadowing. When the game is allowed to present its story. Since we'll never get to explore peaceful towns, there aren't many moments for exposition outside of cutscenes, and we only get those between story missions. Not that those amount to much. Mostly it's just Jack and the merry gang approaching the next crystal location and talking how much they hate chaos and love to kill chaos. The loading screens though talk a lot about different dimensions and locations of this world being artificially created, mysterious masterminds working from the shadows, and the true purpose of the Warriors of Light. So while Jack and his friends are called Warriors of Light and fit pretty much everything the legend described, even their number when they recruited Neon after the first main mission, we soon learn that there isn't really an evil being called Chaos for the Warriors to defeat. Instead, they are sent on a mission to restore the 4 crystals of the elements to save the world. So pretty much the original mission from Final Fantasy I. But during their travels, they have glimpses of a forgotten past. The game tells us that the warriors lose their memories once they awaken to their cause, to free them from obligations and not have them held back by emotions. But there seems to be something more sinister going on. The warriors have flashes of memories that show them fighting the same battles, so it seems this isn't the first time Jack and his friends undergo this journey. And it seems that a currently unknown party has an interest in the Warriors of Light venturing out to destroy chaos over and over again. We learn all this from the aforementioned short cutscenes that only ever show us like 20 seconds at a time, and through optional reports and log entries we can find during the missions, and of course from some of the loading screens. It's pretty obvious from the start that things are not as they seem, but we only learn the extent to that in the last few chapters. And the protagonist's amnesia is a convenient way to hide a lot of information from the player. Still, a lot of scenes are confusing and nonsensical, certainly thanks to Tetsuya Nomura, who might not have been director on this one, but creative producer, and he provided the concept for this game. And well, the overcomplicated and fragmented presentation and the way characters do their best to hide basic information from the protagonist just screams Kingdom Hearts. Especially 3, but mostly all of them after 1. Thing is, I like the story and I would have loved to experience it for real, not just in small bites and a bit of flavor text and one big revelation at the end. The game is in fact not a reimagining of Final Fantasy I, but a kind of prequel that ends with the start of FF1. We get to see where Garland came from, how the Fiends came to be, and why there was a last-minute time travel plot in the original game. Though this game is guilty of the same thing, but I guess that's to be expected to set up the events of Final Fantasy I. The ending was pretty great, but the game didn't earn it. There should have been way more JRPG in this game. Even Souls games let you find friendly NPCs and talk to them and complete quests for them and explore the world a bit. Nothing of this is here. You select missions from a list. Everything you learn is part of the main progression, aside from some notes you can find that explain a bit more about the mystery faction. But what about the party members? What about the few other NPCs we meet? And yeah, even when it comes to those we don't even interact with, it's just a few. This world is devoid of human life. We learn that the princess fancies Jack, and from how he reacts, he also has a thing for her. And well, that's it. Most of the townsfolk we can talk to from the menu seem more or less friendly, at least at first, before we stirred up a ruckus by restoring the crystals, for whatever reason, when they slowly turn hostile. The royal family we get to meet like 2 or 3 times is mostly indifferent, and the king's advisor is wary of the warriors. And Jack's party members are just good friends, but not too close to Jack. And that's all for their personality. Neon seems to start with an arc, but it's forgotten after 2 missions, and the last party member, Sophia, appeared to have a mysterious past, but that also led to nothing, until the big reveal at the end. That also didn't do anything for the character's personality. Jack himself is fine. I like the guy. When the game was announced and the first trial version dropped, it seemed he was just this edgy, always angry dude who says fuck a lot in a Final Fantasy game with lots of blood.
I don't give a fuck who you are!
But he's actually well-rounded. He acts rather harsh and unfriendly because of his devotion to his mission, but he is quick to aid his comrades and give them emotional support in his own way. And he seems to really care for them. And when the princess asked him for a favor, he agreed without hesitation. He was mostly angry, but there was more to it. He wasn't just angry. He's not Kratos. But yeah, that's it pretty much for all the characters. I overall enjoyed this game very much. I didn't care for most of the story or most of the characters. There were times when I found the mystery pretty intriguing, but the Nomura-esque presentation pulled me out of it pretty quickly. The gameplay was pretty fun most of the time, at first because fights were really tense, like in any good Souls-like, and later because I found the perfect playstyle for me that kinda got overly powerful pretty quickly. An ultra fast fist fighter in combination with an ability to heal with every strike, and a mage with access to white and black magic in my second job slot. Bosses just crumbled under my Ultima spell, and regular enemies were no match for my Fists of Fury. The game wasn't really that challenging anymore after the Tiamat boss fight, in part because after that I settled on this playstyle, but also because I came to grips with how all the strange systems work and what the game expected of me. I had fun. It's a fun game, but not necessarily a good one.
Bullshit.
Searching for a reason, my mind is on a journey, but I'm quickly running out of time.